Richard Sterling was the archetype of success. With assets spread across diverse sectors like technology, real estate, and finance, he had built an empire through his cunning and a good dose of luck. His name was frequently stamped on the covers of business magazines, and he was both admired and envied for his substantial fortune. However, beneath the surface of the accomplished businessman, a growing dissatisfaction was simmering. Richard was exhausted by the superficial interest of the people who gravitated around him, a toxic mix of sycophants, opportunists, and suitors motivated more by his wallet than by who he truly was. Every smile seemed a facade, every greeting a calculation. On a gray autumn afternoon, as he gazed at the city from high up in his luxurious office, Richard made a decision that would alter the course of his life. "No more masquerades," he murmured to himself, staring at the distorted reflection in the panoramic window. That same week, Richard began his peculiar experiment. He opted for a drastic change. He would live incognito as an ordinary citizen. He temporarily said goodbye to his mansion overlooking the lake and rented a modest house in a lower middle-class neighborhood, several miles away from his usual world. The chosen property was a small brick house with a tiny front garden that needed tending. The furniture inside was functional but devoid of any luxury he was accustomed to. For Richard, every detail of this new environment was as much a novelty as it was a challenge. Upon moving in, he swapped his custom-made suits for simple, anonymous clothes, seeking to disappear into the crowd. In the neighborhood, no one knew that the calm man now walking a rescued dog through the streets was a magnate. Richard felt each curious look on him as a genuine assessment, unfiltered by his fortune. His days began to have a new and unpretentious routine: small trips to the local market, walks in the nearby park, and attempts at home repairs. In each interaction, he sought the authenticity that was so lacking in his previous world. On a particularly normal morning, while struggling with a choice of products in a supermarket aisle, Richard truly felt lost, not due to a lack of ability to choose, but because of the strangeness of his own simplicity. It was at that moment, between shelves of canned goods and packages of pasta, that a friendly voice interrupted his thoughts. "You seem a bit confused with so many options. Can I help?" The voice belonged to Emma, whose sincere smile brightened the fluorescent-lit aisle. She extended her hand, picking up a can from the shelf. "This one is great if you want something quick and tasty." "Thank you," Richard responded, surprised by the spontaneous kindness. "It's my first time trying to decide on this." "We all go through it at some point," she laughed, guiding him through the aisle as they shared impressions about easy cooking. What started as simple assistance turned into a friendly conversation that continued to the checkout. "I'm Emma, by the way. I live just around the corner," she said, pointing casually outside the supermarket. "Richard," he replied, feeling a bit of relief for not having to adorn his name with titles or contexts. "Looks like I'm your neighbor." Thus, with a shopping cart between them, Richard's new life began. A life where he hoped to finally find a sense of value not measured in dollar signs. What he did not yet know was that this change would bring much more than just anonymity. The first days in his new residence brought Richard a series of small discoveries and challenges. Amid these novelties, he often felt like a foreigner exploring unknown territory. Each daily task, from paying utility bills at a local store to deciding which detergent to buy, was an experience that pulled him out of his comfort zone. One such morning, Richard found himself in the neighborhood supermarket, a small and cozy establishment that contrasted sharply with the gourmet markets he was accustomed to frequenting. He stopped in front of a shelf crammed with canned goods, completely bewildered by the variety of choices confronting him. The brands were unfamiliar, and each label seemed to scream for his attention. It was then that a gentle voice interrupted his growing anxiety. "Need some help?" The woman beside him smiled, her gaze filled with a friendly curiosity that seemed devoid of any ulterior motive. Richard turned, meeting Emma's eyes. He immediately noticed the simplicity of her appearance: hair tied back in a practical bun, a cotton blouse, and jeans that spoke of an uncomplicated life. "Ah, yes, thank you. I'm trying to decide which of these to take. But it's my first time doing this," he confessed, somewhat awkwardly. Emma laughed softly, a sound that seemed to brighten the narrow supermarket aisle. "Well, you're not alone. I always get stuck between these two," she said, pointing to 2 brands of peeled tomatoes. "If you want something that goes well with any dish, I'd recommend this one." She picked up a bright red can, handing it to him. "Thank you, really. I'm Richard, by the way," he said, accepting the can and offering a grateful smile. "Emma," she replied, extending her hand. "I live just around the corner. It's good to see a new face around here." As they walked through the aisles, Emma shared tips on the best products and the deals of the day, while Richard listened, increasingly fascinated not only by her recommendations but by the ease with which she navigated this all-too-common world. The conversation flowed naturally from food to hobbies, and Richard learned that Emma was a teacher at a local school, passionate about literature and gardening. "You seem like someone who knows how to enjoy the little things," Richard commented, impressed by her passion for such everyday subjects. "It's the only way to live, don't you think?" Emma smiled, placing a box of tea in her cart. "And you, what brought you here?" "Ah, I'm trying something new, living a bit differently than I'm used to," Richard said, choosing his words carefully. "You know, exploring new horizons." Emma nodded, appearing to understand. "Sometimes, change is exactly what we need." By the time they reached the checkout, the conversation between them already seemed like the exchange between old friends. They promised to meet for a coffee soon, a promise that Richard hoped to fulfill. As he carried his bags out of the supermarket, he couldn't help but feel a bit more anchored in this new world. What he still didn't know was that this simple casual encounter was just the prelude to a series of events that would challenge every notion he had about himself and what it meant to live a normal life. After their casual encounter in the supermarket, Richard and Emma discovered that they shared more than just a preference for a particular type of peeled tomato. They were neighbors, living just a few houses apart from each other. This discovery quickly transformed a simple act of assistance into a budding friendship. "It's funny to think that we live so close and have never bumped into each other before," Emma commented as they walked together down the quiet street leading to their homes. "Yes, it is indeed a happy coincidence. I hope it's not the last time our paths cross like this," Richard said, the weight of the grocery bags in his hands feeling lighter with the company. Emma smiled, waving at a woman passing by with a baby stroller. "This is a very close-knit community. I'm sure you'll be welcomed here." The conversation flowed naturally, and by the time they reached their respective homes, they had arranged to meet again for coffee that same week. Richard felt pleasantly surprised by the ease of this new friendship, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A few days later, during a pleasant meeting at the small corner cafe, Emma introduced Richard to her best friend, Alice. With blonde hair and watchful eyes, Alice was more reserved than Emma, but equally warm in her welcome. "It's a pleasure to meet the famous neighbor Emma has been talking so much about," Alice said, with a smile that, while charming, carried a hint of caution. "I hope it's only good things," Richard joked, noticing a slight tension in Alice's gaze. "Of course, only good things," Alice confirmed, but her eyes scrutinized Richard, as if trying to decipher more than his words revealed. As the months passed, the friendship between Richard and Emma deepened. They spent long afternoons discussing literature, sharing life stories, and occasionally, accompanied by Alice, exploring local trails or watching old movies projected in Emma's backyard. Alice, meanwhile, maintained a constant presence, always slightly on the fringe, observing the growing closeness between Richard and Emma with an indecipherable expression. She was more of a listener than a talker, her comments always precise and thoughtful. On a sunny afternoon, while enjoying a picnic in the city park, Richard realized how integrated he felt in this small community. Emma laughed at something he had said, and Alice offered them sandwiches she had carefully prepared. "You know, I really didn't expect to feel so at home here," Richard confessed, watching the families around them, children running and elderly couples walking hand in hand. "It's the power of simplicity," Emma said, serving him more tea. "Sometimes, life doesn't need big twists to be complete. It just needs good friends." Alice, listening intently, smiled subtly, but her gaze remained a mystery. As she observed the interaction between Richard and Emma, she kept her discoveries and intentions carefully hidden, silently planning her next moves. Emma and Richard, immersed in their newfound camaraderie, were unaware of the complexity of the thoughts behind Alice's smile. They were about to discover that even the simplest ties can be woven with complex patterns and hidden intentions. As weeks turned into months, the relationship between Richard and Emma blossomed with a naturalness that even Richard found surprising. He, who had always measured relationships through gains and losses like a shrewd businessman, now found himself enjoying a connection that flourished without ulterior motives, cultivated by genuine moments and simple pleasures. Emma had the gift of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. Their daily commutes from school were not just routine movements but opportunities to share stories about their days, discuss books they were reading, or simply enjoy each other's company. Richard began to cherish these small moments, realizing that they wove a tapestry of complicity and affection between them. One Saturday afternoon, as they walked back from the local cinema after watching a comedy that had left them with tears of laughter in their eyes, Richard looked at Emma and saw not just the woman he was beginning to love but a true friend. "You know," Richard started, a smile still lingering on his lips, "I've never laughed so much at a movie before." Emma smiled, her eyes shining under the light of a street lamp that lit the sidewalk. "It's because you needed to relax a little. You worked too much, you know." "I know," he admitted. "But somehow, with you, it seems like the problems are a little less heavy." It was true. The simplicity of Emma's life, away from the complicated social webs and expectations of Richard's world, offered a refuge he had never thought to find. The dinners they prepared together in their modest kitchen were not just meals but sessions of sharing and learning. Emma taught Richard to cook simple dishes, while he brought lesser-known wines for them to try together. One evening, as Emma was chopping vegetables and Richard was heating the oven, he couldn't help but watch her. "You know," he said, the sound of the onion being chopped filling the space between them, "I never thought I'd be so happy in a kitchen." Emma laughed, tossing the chopped onion into the pan with a satisfying sizzle. "Welcome to my world, the world where cooking is more therapeutic than therapy." "And I'm starting to believe it," he replied, his tone light and sincere. As the night fell and the food cooked, filling the air with inviting aromas, the bond between them deepened, woven by shared laughter and looks that spoke more than words could express. It was during one of these evenings, while they were washing the dishes together, that Emma, her hands full of suds, stopped and looked at Richard. "You're different, Richard. More present, I would say." "I'm happy about that." Richard dried one hand on a dish towel and gently pushed a strand of hair from Emma's face. "It's all because of you, Emma. You've shown me a part of life that I had forgotten, or perhaps never truly known." The warmth between them grew, fueled by the simplicity and authenticity of their encounters. However, as they ventured into deeper emotional territory, the shadows of undisclosed secrets and hidden intentions began to form in the distance, threatening the peace they had found. It was a prelude to what was to come, a reminder that not all tales are simple and that some flowers, even the most beautiful, may conceal thorns. On an apparently ordinary day, while everyday life unfolded with its usual simplicity, Alice found herself in the small public library of the neighborhood. It was a tranquil place, where time seemed to move slower, surrounded by shelves full of dusty books and stacks of newspapers and magazines that told stories of the past. Alice, always the observer, had a particular interest in local history and often spent hours browsing through old materials, seeking to better understand the community where Emma and now Richard, her new acquaintance, lived. However, that day, her focus shifted when a stack of national newspapers, somewhat neglected in a corner, caught her attention. Driven by an inexplicable curiosity, Alice began to sift through the newspapers. Pages of politics, economics, social events, each telling a different story. It was then that a photo on an economic page made her heart skip a beat. There was Richard, recognizable even in a photo taken at a business conference a few years ago. The article's title spoke of technology market magnates and highlighted Richard sterling as an example of success. Alice felt her pulse quicken as she read the article, absorbing every word that described Richard's vast wealth and influence. A mix of shock and opportunity crossed her mind. So he's not just a simple new resident, she murmured to herself, a plan beginning to form in her cunning mind. She looked around, ensuring she was alone, before carefully folding the newspaper and placing it under her arm. As she left the library, her step was light, but her mind was heavy with possibilities. In the following days, Alice observed Richard and Emma from a new perspective. She noticed how Richard seemed comfortable in situations that should be strange for someone of simple origin. Each gesture, each word that previously seemed innocent, was now viewed under a suspicious light. One afternoon, finding herself casually with Richard in the park while he read a book on the bench, Alice decided to probe. "Richard, have you traveled a lot? Your stories sometimes sound like those of someone who has seen a lot of the world." Richard, unaware of her knowledge, smiled modestly. I've had my share of travels. Nothing too extravagant, just a bit here and there." "Interesting," Alice responded, her gaze too fixed, her mind working quickly. "You seem like someone who knows how to appreciate the finer things in life, even in small doses." Richard, sensing a slightly inquisitive tone, just nodded, returning to his reading. Alice, on the other hand, walked away with more questions than answers, but with a firm decision in mind. She decided not to reveal her new knowledge about Richard's true identity immediately. Instead, Alice began to devise a plan that would not only confirm her suspicions but also put Richard in a position where he would have to reveal his true face, all without Emma knowing. Alice knew that information was power, and she intended to use this power for her own benefit, still uncertain about how, but determined to find a way. As Alice's scheme unfolded in secret, the relationship between Richard and Emma continued to thrive, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. They were about to learn that not all truths are revealed in the light, and that some discoveries have the power to destroy as much as they build. With the revelation of Richard's true identity weighing on her mind, Alice began to feel a toxic mix of envy and desire. It was not just the desire for what Richard could offer in material terms, but also for the genuine affection he and Emma shared, something she herself had never experienced. These emotions simmered within her, driving her to act in ways she wouldn't have foreseen weeks ago. On a gray afternoon, Alice approached Paul, a history teacher at the school where she and Emma worked. Paul was known for his friendly and somewhat naive nature, traits Alice knew she could manipulate to her advantage. They met at the local cafe, a small establishment with wooden tables and a cozy atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the coldness of Alice's plan. "Paul, have you ever thought about how a little push could improve your career?" Alice began, stirring her coffee while watching Paul with a calculating gaze. Paul, taking the bait, leaned forward, interested. "What do you mean, Alice? What if I told you I have a plan that could benefit both you and me? I need a small favor, and in return, I can ensure that your next performance review is exceptionally positive," Alice offered, her voice low and persuasive. Hesitation crossed Paul's face, but the temptation was palpable. "And what exactly would you need me to do?" "It's simple," Alice smiled, her mind already weaving the web. "I need you to pretend to have a romantic interest in Emma. Nothing serious, just enough to create a doubt." Paul frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Emma is my colleague, Alice. This doesn't seem right." "Don't worry, it will only be for a short period. Besides, it won't really hurt anyone, and you'd be helping me enormously," Alice pressed, knowing Paul was on the verge of agreeing. Reluctantly, Paul agreed. In the following days, under Alice's careful direction, he began to appear more frequently by Emma's side, laughing a little louder at her jokes and finding excuses to be near her. The seed was planted, and Alice watched, ready to reap the fruits of her manipulation. Meanwhile, Alice prepared the next step of her plan. She knew that simple rumors would not be enough to fully convince Richard. Therefore, she began to compile evidence of the supposed affair. Photos taken from angles that suggested intimacy, out-of-context text messages between Paul and Emma, and other small pieces of fabricated evidence. When Alice felt she had enough material, she met Richard under the pretext of a casual walk. "Richard, I feel that, as your friend, I must share something troubling with you," she began, her voice laden with false hesitation. Richard, already feeling a knot forming in his stomach, stopped, facing Alice with a grim expression. "What's happened, Alice?" With a trembling hand, she passed the photos to Richard, watching every change in his expression as he flipped through the images. Doubt, pain, and finally, anger unfolded on his face as he tried to process what he was seeing. I don't know what to say," Richard murmured, his voice low and broken. Alice placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Richard. I thought you should know." As Richard walked away, his world turned upside down. Alice felt a complex mix of victory and emptiness. She had succeeded in planting the seed of doubt, but at what cost? As she watched Richard disappear into the distance, she knew the coming weeks would reveal the true price of her actions. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the quiet streets of the neighborhood when Richard, with the evidence Alice had provided still burning in his hands, knocked on Emma's door. His heart, once filled with admiration and affection for Emma, was now heavy with doubt and betrayal. Emma opened the door, her usual smile fading as she saw Richard's grim expression. "Richard, what's wrong? You look shaken," she said, concern mocking every word. Richard, his voice trembling with contained emotion, confronted her directly. "Emma, can you explain this?" He extended the photos and printed messages, his gaze fixed on her face, searching for any sign of guilt. Emma took the papers, her confusion evident as she flipped through the material. "What? Richard, this isn't what you think. I have nothing to do with Paul. These are just photos and messages taken out of context." "How can I believe you, Emma? Everything here seems to indicate otherwise." Richard's voice rose, a mix of anger and despair. "I thought we were honest with each other. I trusted you." Emma, tears beginning to form in her eyes, tried to approach him. "Richard, please, you need to listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. I would never do something like this. Please, look at me and see that I am telling the truth." But the seeds of doubt planted by Alice had already deeply rooted in Richard's heart. Every gesture from Emma, every word now seemed tinged with potential deception. I don't know what to think anymore," he said, stepping back as Emma reached out to him. "Richard, don't let anything or anyone divide us without cause." "I value what we have too much," Emma pleaded, her voice breaking. Richard, heartbroken by uncertainty and pain, shook his head. "I need some time to think," he murmured before turning and walking away, leaving Emma alone, her tears now flowing freely. In the days that followed, Richard shut himself off from the world. He pondered incessantly over the images and messages, each review only deepening his sense of betrayal. He recalled every moment shared with Emma, now obscured by suspicion. In his heart, a resolution grew, the promise to himself that he would never let his guard down again. Emma, for her part, was devastated. She knew that the trust between them had been shaken, perhaps irreparably. Amidst her sadness, she tried to piece together how this situation had unfolded, her mind turning to Alice, whose strange coldness in recent days now seemed sinister. The relationship between Richard and Emma, once full of laughter and shared plans, was now in ruins. The love that had blossomed so beautifully was withering under the weight of accusations and misunderstandings, and as Richard grappled with his feelings of betrayal, Emma prepared to clear her name, not just for their relationship, but for her own integrity. Thus, as the sun set on another day, the stage was set for confrontations and revelations, with each facing their own internal and external battles. In the gloomy days following the breakup between Richard and Emma, Alice acted quickly, seizing the opportunity to further insert herself into Richard's life. Shaken and vulnerable, he found in Alice a seemingly comforting presence. With Emma out of the picture and his own mind turbulent with doubts and disillusionment, Richard was a solitary figure in need of support. Alice began to visit Richard more frequently, initially under the pretext of checking on how he was handling the situation. "You shouldn't be alone at times like these, Richard. Everyone needs a friend," she would say, bringing with her homemade meals and a readiness to listen. "I really appreciate this, Alice. I don't know what I'd do without someone to talk to," Richard admitted during one of these visits, feeling somewhat lighter after venting his frustrations and sorrows. Alice smiled, sitting next to him on the sofa, her hand finding his in a comforting manner. "That's what friends are for. I'm here for you, Richard. And not just for the good times." As the days passed, Alice's solace gradually morphed into something more. She was always available, always ready to offer a kind word or a supportive gesture. And for Richard, whose heart was still healing from the accusations and the breakup with Emma, Alice's constant presence began to feel like a balm. One evening, as they shared a wine in Richard's living room, the conversation flowed more freely than ever. Alice laughed at Richard's jokes and shared personal stories that painted her own struggles and triumphs. "You know, Richard, life throws us curves, but it's how we handle them that really defines who we are," she said, her gaze locked on his. Richard, moved by the company and the wine, found himself responding, "I never would have gotten through these last few weeks without you, Alice. You've shown me that there's more to life than just the blows we take." It was in that moment, under the soft light of the candles Alice had brought, that their relationship changed. A comforting hug slid into a kiss, initially hesitant, but soon deep and meaningful. Both knew they were crossing a threshold, moving from friends to something more, a shift that felt both natural and unexpected. Meanwhile, Emma, though distant, couldn't help but feel a profound sadness and betrayal. From her window, she sometimes saw Alice entering Richard's house, and each sight was a blow to her already wounded heart. She knew, through murmurs among acquaintances and not-so-discreet glances, that Richard and Alice were now together. The pain of this reality was sharp, and Emma felt increasingly isolated, questioning not only Richard's love but also Alice's friendship. With Richard and Alice's relationship flourishing, a new dynamic began to take shape in their lives. As they explored this new chapter together, Emma withdrew, forging a path that would soon require from her a strength she did not know she possessed. The days ahead promised not only revelations but also redefinitions of paths, where each would have to confront their truths and the consequences of their choices. Emma found herself at a crossroads of emotions and uncertainties. Observing from a distance the unfolding relationship between Richard and Alice, she felt a painful mix of betrayal and loss. However, her intuition told her there was more to the story than met the eye. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma decided to act, refusing to accept the end of her relationship with Richard without fully understanding the events that led to their breakup. Committed to her mission, Emma began gathering information. She recalled strange interactions, misplaced comments, and the details of the evidence presented by Alice. All of this formed a puzzle that she was determined to piece together. Her first stop in this quest for truth was Paul, the co-worker who, according to the supposed evidence, had had an affair with her. On a rainy afternoon, Emma approached him in the teacher's lounge, where he was organizing his materials for upcoming classes. "Paul, we need to talk," she said, closing the door softly behind her. Paul looked at her, surprised and a bit nervous. "Of course, Emma. What's going on?" "It's about the accusations that have been made against us. I know nothing happened between us, Paul. But I need to know, why are there photos and messages that suggest otherwise? How did this start?" Emma spoke, her voice firm, but her eyes betraying the anguish she felt. Paul hesitated, avoiding her gaze before sighing deeply. "Emma, I was a fool," he began, clearly struggling with guilt. "Alice convinced me to be part of a plan. She said it was just a harmless prank, something to test the trust between you and Richard." "A prank?" Emma repeated, incredulous. "Do you understand how much this has cost me? How much it has destroyed?" Paul ran his hands through his hair, distressed. "I know, and I am deeply sorry. Alice pressured me, Talked about helping with my performance review. I never thought it would go so far or actually hurt someone. I was wrong, and I am sorry." Emma listened, each word enhancing the clarity of the manipulation that had occurred. "I need everything, Paul. Every detail you can give me about Alice's plan," she said, determined to bring this truth to light. Paul agreed, promising to help Emma in any way he could to rectify the damage caused. Together, they began to document everything Paul knew, planning how they could expose Alice's actions and clear Emma's name. As Emma and Paul plotted their course of action, the weight of the truth began to unfold, with implications that promised to shake the foundations of their lives and relationships. Emma's determination to seek justice and clarity was about to confront a web of deceptions, in an encounter that would reveal the true colors of everyone involved. The evening was meticulously planned by Richard. He had chosen an elegant restaurant, with an intimate atmosphere, candles gently illuminating the tables, and soft music filling the air. It was the perfect setting for what he believed would be a milestone in his life. Throughout the dinner, Richard felt a mix of nervousness and excitement, while Alice, stunning in a silk dress, seemed radiant and completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "You have brightened my life so much these past few months, Alice," Richard began, his voice trembling as he reached for a small box in his coat pocket. "I can't imagine spending my days without you." Alice smiled, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Richard, you've made me feel the same. I'm so happy with you." It was at this moment, just as Richard was about to kneel, that the restaurant door burst open. Emma, with fierce determination etched on her face, walked straight to their table. Her immediate presence transformed the atmosphere from romantic to tense. "Richard, I need you to hear what I have to say," Emma stated firmly, ignoring the surprised looks from other patrons and from Richard himself, who stood up, shocked by her sudden appearance. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Richard asked, confused and still holding the ring box. "I came because you deserve to know the truth before you do something you might regret forever," Emma replied, her gaze fixed on Alice, who was beginning to look nervous. Alice tried to intervene. "Emma, this is neither the place nor the time." "Actually, it's exactly the time," Emma interrupted, pulling documents and photos out of her purse. "All of this was a lie, Richard. Alice manipulated Paul to pretend to have a romance with me, all to drive us apart." Richard, his hands trembling, took the evidence from Emma. Photos, messages, and a written statement from Paul detailing the plan and Alice's involvement. As the pages turned, the reality of what had happened sank in. Richard's face became a mask of pain and anger. "How could you?" He turned to Alice, the betrayal clear in his voice. "Why would you do something like this?" Alice, now pale, tried to explain. "Richard, I thought we were meant to be together. I just wanted to speed things up. I love you." "Love?" Richard echoed bitterly. "This isn't love, Alice. It's manipulation." The argument was interrupted by the murmurs of other customers and the manager approaching to check on the disturbance. Richard, feeling the weight of the situation, looked at Emma and then at Alice. I need a moment," he said, abruptly standing up and leaving the restaurant, the evidence still in his hand. Emma stood still, looking at Alice with a mix of victory and sadness. There was no joy in exposing the truth this way. Alice, for her part, sat down, defeated and alone, while whispers continued around her. The dinner planned to be one of the happiest moments of Richard's life had turned into a revelation that shattered the veil of illusions, leaving only raw truth. As Richard walked away alone, trying to assimilate the events, Emma knew the road ahead would be difficult and filled with repairs to be made, both in her heart and in the broken relationships. The cold night enveloped the city as Richard, still trying to process the avalanche of revelations, found Emma waiting for him outside the restaurant. The light from the street lamps cast soft shadows on her face, revealing an expression of resolute serenity mixed with emotional fatigue. Richard, with the documents still in hand, approached her, his hesitant steps reflecting his inner turmoil. "Emma," he began, his voice laden with remorse and confusion. I don't know what to say, except that I am deeply sorry. For everything." Emma nodded, her posture firm, but her eyes revealing the pain she felt. "Richard, I didn't do this for us to get back together. I did it because it was the right thing to do. You needed to know the truth." Richard looked at her, appreciation and sadness mixed in his gaze. "I've been a fool, Emma. I let jealousy and manipulation sway me without questioning it. I destroyed something good between us because of my own insecurities." "We all make mistakes, Richard," Emma replied softly. "What matters is what we do afterward. I hope this teaches you to trust more in your heart and less in appearances." There was a prolonged silence between them, only the soft sound of the night breeze filling the space. Richard lowered his head, Emma's words touching a deep chord. "What now?" he asked, the uncertainty clear in his voice. "I think we both need time," Emma suggested. "Time to heal and perhaps to understand what we really want from life and the people in our lives." Richard nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. "You've always been the most sensible person I've known," he said, a small, sad smile forming on his lips. "Thank you, Emma, for everything. Even if our paths do not continue together, know that I am grateful for every moment we shared." Emma smiled back, a sweet and melancholic gesture. "I am grateful too, Richard. Take care, all right." With those final words, they parted ways, each walking their separate paths under the dark mantle of the night. As Emma walked away, her stride firm yet thoughtful, Richard remained standing, watching her until she disappeared from sight. Deep down, he knew that this separation, though painful, was necessary for both of them. They had entered each other's lives for a reason, perhaps not to stay together, but to learn valuable lessons about trust, truth, and the power of redemption. In the solitude that followed, Richard reflected on the changes he needed to make in his own life. The night was still young, and as the city around continued indifferent to the human dramas unfolding in its streets, Richard felt, for the first time in a long time, a glimmer of hope for a new beginning. Emma, in turn, walked back home with a lighter heart, knowing she had done what was necessary, freed from the weight of an unspoken secret, and ready to face whatever the future held. The night had fallen heavily over the city, with dark clouds pouring relentless rain onto the empty streets. The sound of rain beating against the windows created a constant background noise, punctuated only by occasional distant thunder. Richard was at home, lost in somber reflections about recent events, when he heard urgent knocks at his door. He stood up, surprised, as he wasn't expecting visitors at that hour and especially not on such a stormy night. Opening the door, he found Emma, drenched from the rain, holding her 6-year-old daughter, Ellen, in her arms. Emma was visibly shaken, desperation clear in her eyes. "Richard, please, you need to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Ellen is very sick. She started having a high fever and convulsions. I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, Richard acted instinctively. "Let's take her to the hospital now," he said, carefully taking Ellen from Emma's arms and rushing back to his car. As he drove through the nearly deserted streets, Richard kept one eye on the road and the other on Ellen, who was delirious with fever in the back seat, with Emma beside her trying to comfort her. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. We're almost there," Emma murmured, trying to hide her own panic. Arriving at the hospital, Richard parked in front of the emergency room and ran to get help. Doctors and nurses quickly surrounded the car, taking Ellen inside on a stretcher. Emma followed them, looking back only once to thank Richard with a quick nod before disappearing through the automatic doors. Alone in the hospital parking lot, Richard felt the weight of the situation. Ellen's emergency had brought to the surface the reality of his connection with Emma and her daughter, a connection that, despite all the complications and mistakes of the past, still meant something profound to him. After standing in the rain for a few minutes, reflecting, Richard decided to go into the hospital. He couldn't just leave knowing that Ellen was fighting for her health. Inside, he found Emma sitting in a waiting room, her trembling hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door through which the doctors had taken her daughter. Richard sat down next to her, offering his presence as a silent gesture of support. "How is she?" he asked softly. "The doctors are still with her," Emma replied, her voice weak. "They said they'll do everything they can. I just hope it's enough." The two sat in silence, united by their concern for Ellen, waiting for news. The gravity of the situation had temporarily pushed aside the tensions of the past, reminding them that above all, there was a little life that connected them in ways that previous words and actions could not undo. In that waiting room, as the rain continued outside, Richard and Emma faced the uncertainty together, waiting for news that could change their lives. In this moment of crisis, old wounds began to give way to a shared concern, heralding a possible new chapter in their lives, filled with challenges but also hope. The hours at the hospital dragged on, heavy and slow, as Ellen was under intensive care. Richard and Emma found themselves caught in a cycle of agonizing waiting, marked by the constant hum of machines and the occasional bustle of doctors and nurses passing by. Seated side by side in the waiting room, each lost in their own thoughts, they shared the silence laden with worry and hope. Eventually, the pediatrician emerged through the double doors, removing his mask with a cautiously optimistic expression. "Ellen is stable now," he announced, addressing a visibly tense Emma. "We've managed to control the fever and convulsions. She'll need to stay under observation for some more time, but the worst is over." Emma let out a relieved sigh, her hands trembling as she fought to hold back tears. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, of course. I'll take you to her," the doctor replied, motioning for her to follow. Richard watched as Emma hurried to see her daughter, feeling a mix of relief and helplessness. He stayed back, reflecting on the fragility of life and the role he now played in Emma and Ellen's lives. Moved by a surge of responsibility and care, he approached the reception desk to inquire about the hospital expenses. "I would like to take care of all expenses for Ellen White," he told the clerk behind the counter, who looked at him with a mix of surprise and respect. "Certainly, sir. I'll prepare everything. Thank you for your generosity," she responded, beginning to type on her computer. As Richard dealt with the bureaucracy, he reflected on what this gesture meant. It wasn't just about paying a bill, it was a commitment to the well-being of someone he had grown to care deeply about, beyond the complications of his relationship with Emma. When Emma returned to Richard's side, bringing news that Ellen was sleeping peacefully, she noticed his thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. "I've taken care of the hospital expenses. I don't want you to worry about anything but Ellen getting better," Richard revealed, hoping his gesture would be received as the care he intended, and not as an intrusion. Emma looked at him, tears filling her eyes again, but this time out of gratitude. "Richard, this means a lot to me. Thank you." In that moment, amid the chaos of a crisis and the relief of a disaster averted, something shifted between Emma and Richard. Richard's act not only relieved a financial burden, it began to mend an emotional burden that had been placed between them. They shared a look of mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement that, regardless of past challenges, they could find a way forward, together or apart, with renewed respect and care. Thus, as the rain outside lessened, giving way to a calmer night, Richard and Emma sat together, united in their relief and the cautious hope for better days. As they prepared to face whatever the future held, they knew that the shared experience that night had changed something fundamental in their dynamic, perhaps paving the way for new possibilities in their tumultuous lives. In the days following Ellen's crisis, the hospital became an unexpected meeting point for Richard and Emma. As little Ellen recovered in her hospital room, with her toys scattered across the bed and cartoons often glowing on the small TV, Richard and Emma found themselves sitting side by side, watching her play or rest. The sterile hospital environment, usually a place of tensions and worries, strangely served as a backdrop for a gradual and profound reconnection between them. It was on one of these peaceful afternoons, with the sun gently filtering through the hospital room windows, that Richard brought coffee for Emma. He noticed how fatigue was beginning to leave her face, replaced by a glimpse of relief as Ellen improved. "How are you feeling today?" Richard asked, handing her a cup of hot coffee. Emma accepted it with a grateful smile. "Better, now that Ellen is improving. And you, how have you been?" She looked at him, genuinely curious about his state of mind after the tumultuous events. Richard sighed, looking at Ellen, who was focused on coloring her drawing book. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. About us. I'm sorry for having doubted you, Emma." Emma set the coffee aside, her gaze fixed on his. "I've been thinking too, about how things could have been different. But Richard, what matters now is that we're here, making things better, not just for Ellen but for each other too." Their conversations often dove into deep emotional territories, revisiting old wounds but also sharing laughs and happier memories from the days before the misunderstanding. Each dialogue seemed to add a layer of understanding and forgiveness, slowly weaving the loose threads of their past relationship into something new and possibly stronger. "Do you think we can really start over? After everything?" Richard asked during one of these meetings, the vulnerability evident in his voice. Emma looked at him, then at Ellen, who was now sleeping peacefully. "I believe we can," she replied sincerely. "I think sometimes, through trials, we discover how much we truly matter to each other. And that's a foundation we can build something new on, don't you think?" Richard nodded, moved and inspired by Emma's strength and grace. "I'd like that, Emma. I'd like to try, if you're willing." "I'm willing," she said, a smile forming on her lips. "Let's take it one day at a time." Thus, as Ellen recovered, the bond between Richard and Emma also found its own path to healing. They didn't know what the future held, but they were willing to explore the possibilities together, with open hearts and hopeful minds. In that hospital room, with Ellen's life stabilizing and love slowly rekindling, Richard and Emma learned that sometimes, even the bridges that were broken can be rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than ever. Their ongoing conversations and sharing in the quiet corridors of the hospital signaled not just Ellen's recovery but also the beginning of a new chapter in their own lives, one that promised new understandings and, perhaps, a new chance at love. As Ellen continued to improve, the atmosphere in the hospital gradually became less tense and more filled with hopeful calm. In the many moments shared by Ellen's bedside, both Richard and Emma began to reflect more deeply on the events that had shaken their lives, leading them to a path of acceptance and personal growth. One quiet afternoon, with the sun shining through the hospital room window and Ellen quietly playing with her toys, Emma and Richard had one of the most sincere and open conversations since the start of all the turmoil. "Richard," Emma began hesitantly, while watching Ellen assemble a puzzle, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about us. And I see now that despite the mistakes you made, your heart was always in the right place." Richard, sitting next to her, looked at Emma with gratitude and a touch of surprise. "Emma, hearing that from you means more than you can imagine. I made mistakes, I know. And those mistakes taught me something crucial, that true love isn't found in grand gestures or eloquent words, but in simple moments and honest actions." Emma nodded, a soft smile appearing on her lips. "Yes, exactly. I've also learned something about myself, about forgiving and understanding that we all are flawed. It doesn't make what happened right, but it gives us the chance to grow from it." "And how we are growing, aren't we?" Richard said, a glint of hope in his eyes. "Emma, I want you to know that no matter how things evolve between us, I will always be here for you and Ellen. You've shown me what really matters in life." Emma looked at him, feeling a mix of relief and renewal. "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot to me, and I believe you. I think we're both discovering new versions of ourselves, versions that I hope can coexist and perhaps even thrive together." As the afternoon gave way to evening, they continued talking, each shared word and laugh helping to mend the fissures of the past. With Ellen safe and happy beside them, Emma and Richard began to envision a future where, regardless of the roles they chose to play in each other's lives, they could always rely on each other for support and understanding. Thus, in the comfortable silence that settled between them as Ellen fell asleep, a new understanding emerged. It was a realization that growth often comes with pains, but also brings the promise of new possibilities. For Emma and Richard, the path ahead was still uncertain, but they knew that, whatever direction they chose, they would be better equipped to face together the challenges and joys that life had in store. As the days passed and Ellen's health fully stabilized, Richard and Emma found themselves meeting frequently, not just in a hospital but also in parks and cafes, places where they could talk and rebuild what had been damaged. With each encounter, they carefully wove the fibers of a new relationship, this time anchored in honesty, mutual respect, and a more mature and conscious love. On a sunny afternoon, as they walked side by side through the city park, watching the leaves gently dance in the wind, Richard took the initiative to verbalize the renewed commitment they felt for each other. "Emma," he began, stopping in front of a small lake where ducks swam peacefully, "these last times have been some of the most difficult, but also the most enlightening of my life. I've never wanted another chance as much as I want this one with you. Not just to make things right, but to grow together, as individuals and as a family." Emma, looking at their reflection in the water, felt a wave of emotions. "Richard, I feel the same. What we've been through, it's all shown me how much we're capable of overcoming. And, more importantly, how valuable what we have is. I'm ready to start over, but with a new perspective." "And what would that new perspective be?" Richard asked, genuinely interested. "One where we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, where communication is key, and where respect is the foundation of everything we do and say to each other," Emma responded, her voice firm and certain. Richard nodded, deeply moved by Emma's words. "I agree. And I want you to know that I'm here, not just for the good times. I'm here for all the challenges, all the struggles, because I know that together we are stronger." With that promise in the air, they continued their walk through the park, each step together symbolizing a move toward this shared future. They decided that while the past could serve as a lesson, it would no longer define the course of their relationship. Instead, they chose to look forward, with hope and determination. That day, as the sun began to set, coloring the sky in shades of orange and pink, Richard and Emma felt that a new chapter of their lives was beginning. A chapter that, although uncertain, promised new joys and discoveries. And as they left the park, hand in hand, they knew that together, they were ready to face whatever came next, with open hearts and minds willing to learn and grow. Thus, with this renewed hope and love, Richard and Emma not only turned an important page in their lives, but also set the stage to face new challenges and celebrations, knowing that this time, they would do it together, with a solid foundation of truth and mutual respect. With the renewal of their relationship firmly established, Richard and Emma began to look towards the future with a new sense of purpose and hope. Their walks in the park became regular sessions where, in addition to enjoying each other's company, they discussed plans and dreams, pondering the possibilities that lay ahead of them. On a particularly serene afternoon, with the sky painted in hues of light blue and a gentle breeze whispering through the trees, they sat on an isolated bench, a place that had become special to them. As they watched Ellen play in the nearby playground, the conversation naturally drifted towards the topic of the future. "Emma," Richard began, taking her hand in his, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about how we've grown together again after everything that happened. I would like to talk about something more permanent." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with expectation and a hint of nervousness. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice soft. "Well, I was thinking about us, about the possibility of us getting married." "For real?" Richard said, his heart beating a little faster with the proposition. "And more than that, I'd like to be a real and constant part of Ellen's life, like a father." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, her emotions mixed with surprise and joy. "Richard, that means a lot to me. And to Ellen too," she responded, squeezing his hand. "You know how much she likes you, how she responds to you. Talking about marriage and you taking on a father role, it's more than I could have hoped for. I know it's a big step, and I don't expect an immediate answer," Richard continued, wanting to give her space to process the proposal. "But I want you to know that my commitment to you and Ellen is deep and sincere. I want us to be a family." Emma smiled, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. I would love that, Richard. I think we're ready to start this new chapter together. Let's do it. Let's plan our future together as a family." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of plans and laughter. They discussed ideas for a small wedding, something intimate and meaningful that reflected who they were as a couple. They also talked about how they could rearrange their lives to ensure that Ellen felt as little change as possible, except for the loving and constant addition of Richard as a father figure. As the sun began to set, coloring the sky in gold and pink, they rose from the bench, hand in hand, with Ellen running to join them. Richard and Emma looked at each other, their hearts full of love and anticipation for the future, knowing that together they could face anything life brought their way. Thus, with light hearts and renewed dreams, they walked home, ready to face the challenges and celebrations the future held. The plan was simple yet profoundly meaningful: to form a family, united not just by love but also by mutual respect and dedication. Richard had meticulously planned the moment he would propose to Emma. He wanted it to reflect the new beginning they both longed for, something genuine and memorable. He chose a local park they frequented with Ellen, a place filled with happy memories and children's laughter. It was a spot where nature spread wide, with ancient trees whose leaves whispered stories to the wind and a lake that mirrored the stars like a reflection of the night sky. It was a clear night, where the stars shone brightly, accompanied by the soft glow of the crescent moon. Richard led Emma to a small hill within the park, where an unobstructed view of the starry sky awaited them. The air was crisp, scented with the aroma of night-blooming flowers. "Emma," began Richard, his voice soft but filled with emotion, "this place, these stars, none of it is as beautiful as what you have brought into my life. You've shown me what true love is and what it feels like to be genuinely cared for." Emma, moved by his words, held Richard's hand, feeling the sincerity in each syllable. She looked at him with shining eyes, encouraging him to continue. Richard took a deep breath, kneeling before her under the starry sky. He took a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "Emma, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, learning, growing, and loving. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness began to flow down Emma's face as she looked at Richard, kneeling before her, and at the ring that symbolized a future together. "Yes, Richard, I accept. More than anything, I want to be your wife," she responded, her voice choked with emotion. Richard slid the ring onto Emma's finger and stood up to embrace her, wrapping her in his arms under the vastness of the night sky. They kissed, sealing their commitment, while the stars above seemed to approve of their renewed love, twinkling a bit brighter for a moment. The park, the starry sky, the sounds of nature around, everything contributed to the perfection of the moment. And as they embraced, the reality of their commitment began to settle in. Together, they had weathered storms, but now, under the clear sky, they promised to face the future as one, united by bonds that adversity had only strengthened. With hearts full and immense joy, they walked back through the park, hand in hand, already beginning to dream about their wedding day and all the days that would follow. The decision to marry was not just a step in the journey of their lives. It was a pledge of faith in love, resilience, and the ability to overcome anything, as long as they were together. After the thrilling proposal under the stars, Richard and Emma dedicated themselves to planning a wedding that reflected not just the love they shared, but also the values they held dear. They opted for a modest celebration, far from the pomp and excessive materialism. They desired a day that celebrated love, family, and friendship, something that reminded everyone present about what truly mattered in life. The chosen venue was a small outdoor garden, owned by a family friend. It was a charming space, filled with wildflowers and a small wooden chapel in the background that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. The garden was located on the outskirts of the city, where the noise of cars was replaced by the singing of birds and the rustling of trees. On the wedding day, the sun shone bright and clear, bathing the venue in golden light that seemed to bless the imminent union. Guests began to arrive, dressed elegantly yet simply, each bringing warm smiles and hugs. "This place is beautiful, Emma," "You chose perfectly," commented an aunt of Emma's, as she helped adjust Emma's simple and elegant dress. "Thank you, Aunt. We wanted something that truly represented who we are," Emma replied. Her face lit up with excitement and a touch of nervousness. Meanwhile, Richard, already at the venue, adjusted his tie and chatted with his future father-in-law. "I'm really grateful for today, for everything," Richard said sincerely. "We're happy for you too. Emma deserves all the happiness in the world, and we see how you make her happy," replied Emma's father, placing a comforting hand on Richard's shoulder. The ceremony began with Emma's arrival at the altar, where Richard waited with a smile he could barely contain. She walked toward him to the sound of a gentle guitar played by a close friend, her hands trembling slightly as she held a bouquet of wildflowers. As Emma reached Richard, they exchanged looks filled with love and promise. The officiant, an old family friend, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the journey they had chosen to embark on together. "Richard, Emma, today you choose not only to unite in marriage but also to celebrate what you have overcome and the future you have decided to build together. May this marriage be a reflection of the pure and true love that you share." The vows were deeply personal, written by themselves, and each word resonated with sincerity and depth. When they finally said, "I do," sealing the union with a kiss, applause and cheers echoed through the garden. The reception that followed was equally joyful, with food prepared by friends and family, heartfelt speeches, and lots of dancing. The atmosphere was one of pure celebration and gratitude, each guest sharing in Richard and Emma's joy. As the day turned into night, and the stars began to appear in the sky, the newlyweds shared a slow dance, their bodies close, their hearts beating in unison. In this moment of pure happiness, they knew that, despite adversities, they had found something truly special in each other. As the music wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Richard and Emma felt ready to start the new chapter of their lives, with full hearts and contented souls, knowing that together, they could face anything the future held. After the wedding, Richard and Emma embarked on a new phase of life together, with a renewed sense of partnership and commitment. Each morning, waking up side by side, they were reminded of the love that had overcome many obstacles and of the dreams they still wished to fulfill together. The simplicity of daily life became the backdrop for their happiness. They opted for a less hurried and more mindful routine, cherishing the small moments together, such as preparing breakfast while Ellen got ready for school or walking through the local park on Sunday afternoons. One such morning, as Emma was making pancakes in the kitchen, Richard hugged her from behind, whispering in her ear, "You know, I never thought simplicity could be so rewarding." Emma laughed, turning to face him with a spatula in hand. "That's because you were too busy looking for happiness in grand gestures. Sometimes, the best things in life are the simplest," she replied, kissing him quickly before returning to flip the pancakes. These small interactions became the foundation of their new life. Richard, who had spent most of his adult life chasing material successes, found deep satisfaction in family life. Under Emma's influence, he learned to appreciate the beauty in details, the patience, and the joy that come from nurturing a home filled with love and laughter. They also found ways to give back to the community, getting involved in local activities and supporting projects that promoted the common good. "You were right, Emma," Richard admitted one afternoon as they helped organize a charity event at Ellen's school. "The good really does attract the good. The more we do for others, the more joy we find in our own lives." Emma smiled, holding his hand. "It's a lesson I've learned over the years too, and sharing it with you and Ellen makes it all the more special." Over time, the couple expanded their family, welcoming a rescued dog that quickly became Ellen's enthusiastic guardian and a constant companion on their outdoor adventures. Ellen, growing up in a home filled with love and teachings about kindness and resilience, blossomed into a cheerful and curious child, a reflection of the values her parents cherished. The life of Richard and Emma unfolded as a series of peaceful and happy moments, interwoven with challenges they faced together, further strengthening their bond. They had learned that even in adversity, there was room for growth and rediscovery. On clear nights, the couple enjoyed sitting in their backyard, under a canopy of stars, reflecting on the journey they had traveled. "We really did it, didn't we?" Richard would say, looking at Emma with admiration. "Yes, we did," Emma would respond, squeezing his hand. "And we'll keep doing it, every day." Thus, Richard and Emma lived the truth that good attracts good, a principle that manifested in each of Ellen's laughs, every gesture of affection between them, and every act of kindness they shared with the world. This simple yet powerful wisdom guided every day of their lives, filling them with a purpose and joy that only true understanding of love could provide.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.